Hey y'all, welcome back. My name is Sarah and I love to talk about movies. And today we're going to talk about one of my old time faves, The Bodyguard. If you don't know, The Bodyguard is a 90s classic, okay? So many other films have scenes or took inspiration from The Bodyguard. This was a multi-million dollar collaboration. But first, so in the opening scene, you hear shots ring out. All of a sudden, we're looking at a man's face. The camera slowly pulls further and further away. You see that he's pushing someone down onto the ground and telling them to wait there. We're continuing to move away. Somebody walks around the corner and he turns suddenly to face this person, confirms who he is, then turns back. The camera is still moving further and further away, and we can see that there's somebody lying on the ground. We can see more of our surroundings, see that it's a parking garage. The camera moves up, and you can hear bits and pieces of their conversation. As the camera pans to the side, fades to black, it opens into a new scene where we see the same two men giving our main character, Frank, his last check. That day was going to be his last day working for him. And although his client invited him to stay and extend his contract, he politely declines and heads home. When we get to his house, we can see that there's piles of mail. He clearly hadn't been there in a while. He pushes it to the side, goes inside, makes dinner for one, and is reading the newspaper. In the next scene, you hear people shouting, "Rachel, Rachel," and you see crowds of people offering flowers and all kinds of gifts, including a little doll. Somebody picks up the doll and goes into what looks like a dressing room, huge mirror, lots of makeup and perfume and all kinds of stuff, people moving in and out of the room. There's a television set on the counter, and somebody sets the doll right next to the TV. A couple seconds later, there's a huge explosion and people are screaming. Moving into the next scene, we see Frank's home. Our main character, Frank, meeting with Bill, who is a manager to Rachel Marron, who is a huge global superstar. He's there to hire Frank to protect Rachel and her family. Frank agrees, and the next day heads out to the house to kind of get the lay of the land and see what their security situation is like. By the time he makes it to speak to Rachel directly, he realizes that this is not the job for him and that he doesn't really want to be involved until he speaks with Bill again. Bill kind of made it seem like Rachel was aware of the situation and that she wanted to hire Frank as her bodyguard. When he gets there, he finds out that Rachel don't know nothing about nothing. That's when Bill drops another bombshell that, along with the explosion in her dressing room that was blamed on some technical issue, several threatening letters have been sent directly to Rachel. One was found inside the house, inside a room inside the house, and made it very clear that somehow this person had gained entry into the house and that Rachel and her family were not safe. So Frank agrees to take on Rachel as a client as long as he is allowed to do his job. Day after day, he's making changes to the security procedures. He's having more up-to-date equipment installed, and he's educating the chauffeur on different tactics that he can use should the time come where they need him. At the same time, he's also getting to know Rachel and her son Fletcher and her sister Nikki, and through personal contacts has managed to send some of the letters that Rachel received to professionals to inspect and get their opinion on what they might be dealing with in terms of the threat to Rachel and her family. Things kind of reach a boiling point when Rachel decides to perform a secret show that Frank was not aware of. So as they show up to this club, which I guess is a little bit out of the norm for her, you can see crowds pressing around the limo and she's smiling at everyone, and they make it inside. She goes into her dressing room. She's getting ready to go out on stage when she receives one of the letters and reads it for herself. She's very disturbed by that letter. Her publicist, Cy, is trying to calm her fears and lets it slip that there have been other letters and that someone had gotten into the house without her knowledge. She's very shocked and is now kind of worried, but nevertheless decides to perform. During the performance, there are a couple of hiccups where people are jumping on stage and trying to grab her, and at one point she is knocked off the stage and into the crowd. Frank jumps in to rescue her, and they end up leaving without Cy or without Rachel's other personal bodyguard, Tony. Frank does his checks, makes sure that Fletcher is safe and that the house is secure when Tony comes in. They have a few words and him and Tony come to an understanding. The next day, Rachel asks Frank out on a date. They go to the movies and then to a bar and back to Frank's home. The next morning, Frank has an honest conversation with Rachel and decides to set a boundary where he makes it very clear that he cannot be her bodyguard and also be involved with her romantically. This is a surprise to Rachel and she does not handle it well. There's another performance coming up in Miami, huge performance with high-class clientele. Her performance goes off without a hitch, no problems there. The after party is a bit more eventful. One of Frank's colleagues shows up there. Rachel pops by to introduce herself and ends up walking off with them and later on making out with them. The next morning, Rachel is hungover and still mad. Frank's calm demeanor is starting to crack a little bit and they end up having a little mini fight. He goes out to check his route as normal, comes back, Rachel's gone, nobody knows where she went, not her manager, nobody. They assume that he was with her. While he was out, he reached out to some other contacts to find out what the results were from them testing the letters. The results were very promising. They think that they are narrowing down the suspect list. Upset at her sudden disappearance, he leaves and goes back downstairs to check the route again, finds someone who is blocking one of their exits, asks him to move. That man don't want to move. They end up getting into a fight and Frank completely loses it and ends up beating up this man. Before he gets back upstairs, Rachel gets a phone call that she finds very disturbing. So when Frank comes upstairs, he's fully ready to quit until she agrees to everything that Frank is suggesting to her, which is to cancel the rest of her tour dates and agree to kind of go off the grid for a while. She agrees, and her and Nikki, Fletcher, Henry decide to go visit Frank's father in the mountains. It's a very isolated place where his father lives on his own, and it's there that Rachel learns a bit more about Frank's past. The next day, Frank and his father are walking through the woods, looking at the different tracks, and Frank notices something odd about some tracks heading to the boathouse. He looks up to see Fletcher getting ready to take the speedboat out on the lake. Without explanation, he starts running towards the boat, jumps into the water, grabs Fletcher, and drags him back to the pier. Rachel is very upset and she's yelling at Frank, telling him he's overreacting. Henry is wondering how they're going to get the boat back when it suddenly explodes. Everybody rushes back to the house to pack, only to find that the cars are dead. Frank and his father decide to head out in the morning towards town, and in the meantime to just sit tight and wait. In the middle of the night, Frank finds Nikki in the kitchen very drunk. It's then that Nikki admits that she is responsible, that while intoxicated, she went to a bar, hired someone to hire someone to kill her sister Rachel. She doesn't know who. And she has no idea who's responsible for sending the letters, but that she did hire someone. That person breaks into the house, shoots Nikki, gets out of the house, where Frank tracks him all the way to the main road without being able to identify him. When he's able to get close to town the next day and make a phone call, reaches out to his colleagues again, finds out that they have identified Rachel's stalker and that they've had him in custody for a few hours, which means that the person who attacked them that night and the person that's been stalking Rachel are two different people. So a few days later is Nikki's funeral. Meanwhile, a major award show is coming up and Rachel has been nominated for Best Actress. It's a security nightmare. Hundreds of people walking around, moving behind the scenes, actors, entertainers, cameramen everywhere, caterers, and crew moving backstage. So while he's there, the same colleague who was at the after party in Miami, Portman, shows up. They greet each other, and Frank is curious about who he's guarding. He tells him. More acts continue on stage. Rachel and another actor, Clive, will be presenting the next award. Tensions are very high. Clive and Rachel go on stage together. Rachel gets very nervous. Clive ends up doing most of the presenting, and before the winner could be read, Rachel runs off stage, and it turns out that she won in that category. Extremely embarrassed, she kind of blows up at Farmer, blaming him for her running off the stage, that he's making her paranoid and nervous. Frank escorts Rachel back to her seat in the audience and then comes backstage. He sends Tony off on the other side of the stage, where he ends up confronting Portman backstage and being knocked out. Rachel is announced as the winner for Best Actress and heads up onto the stage. As she waves at the crowd, Frank runs across the stage to block her with his body. He's shot by Portman twice, and they collapse together on stage. Tony regains consciousness and is yelling Portman's name. Frank aims, fires, and shoots Portman twice. Everybody in the audience is screaming. People think that Rachel's hurt, and Frank loses consciousness. In the next scene, you see him being loaded into an ambulance and Rachel going with him. In the next scene, we're at an airfield and Rachel and her team are getting ready to board. Frank is there to say goodbye. He's had a replacement come in. So Frank and Rachel hug and say their goodbyes. She boards the plane. It starts to taxi on the runway when she suddenly asks the pilot to stop, runs out to him, and gives him a real goodbye kiss. In the next scene, she's singing at her next concert. It's the song that they heard while they were dancing together at that bar. The last scene is a farmer. He's at a huge event where there are political and religious figures. His client is, we assume is his client, is being honored there. The camera moves closer and closer to Farmer, who we can see is on the edge of the frame in the shadows, just watching the crowd. And as the host completes the speech, the camera sort of stops there with Frank looking out over the crowd. And that's how the movie ends. So, number one, I love this movie. I know that in the 2025 of things, this movie is like a nightmare for some people. The amount of just lack of care that a lot of the characters give to their own security seems like mind-boggling now. The soundtrack, of course, is amazing. Them vocals are live. Her songs are not chosen just to plop them into the film. There's a lot of movies out there where pop songs are chosen just to plop them in there. Charlie's Angels. And then there are movies where the songs just so seamlessly fit with the character or with the scene. It feels like organic and natural. It's not distracting. It adds to the moment. Like, for example, when Rachel and Frank are out on their date, after they leave the movie theater, they go to just a regular, like, hole-in-the-wall type of bar. Half of it is set up for people to dance, and the other half where you can sit down and eat. Rachel moves them to the dancing side, and that song plays. They notice the song, they mention the lyrics being very sad, they have a laugh about it, and then later on in the film, towards the end of the film, when she's telling Frank goodbye, you hear that song play, and then in the very next scene, she's singing it in a performance. This is not like a self-titled project. This is the experience between two very different types of people put together in unusual circumstances, in danger, under threat, who find that they are attracted to each other. Let me go back to the beginning. Frank's character is kind of interesting to me because he's someone that like grew up with both parents, seeing them, you know, in a loving, caring relationship, only child. And the route that he chose for his life is not a traditional one. And then on the other side of things, you have Rachel and you have Nikki, two sisters. And I think their mother is also in the house as well, although I think you only see her like once or twice in the film. So their relationship is something that's foreign to him already, having a sibling. The plight of the older sister versus the younger sister, more talented sister, and their whole relationship being very complicated because it would be different, I think, if Nikki never wanted to be a musician and never wanted to have a career in entertainment. And then her younger sister joining her band that she created and then kind of blowing them all out of the water and becoming her personal assistant was very complex. And then her having Fletcher too was like, what's going on with this now? Because you never see who is his father. Nobody ever talks about Fletcher's father. I don't even think you see a picture of him in the house. So Rachel being a single parent was not something that was a hurdle or a challenge in terms of her path to stardom at all, it seems. So that is also interesting. There are so many things about the story that are non-traditional and not predictable, because Rachel being someone who is at the peak of stardom at this age as a single parent is incredible. It is even now still different from the norm, because nowadays movies about pop stars, they're teen somethings, 20 somethings, sudden fame, sudden wealth, and how they're dealing with it. Well, she is at a point in her career where she is like kind of past all that. She's maintained certain values past the point of like the sudden fame and the sudden wealth. She got that wealth, baby. She got this big old house, which is amazing. So Californian, especially for that time period. It says something that her house is a functional working house. They do rehearsals in that house. They do photo shoots out of that house. She has like a whole fake bedroom set up for photo shoots, whereas her actual room is very small and simple and is next to her son's room. This is a house where work is done. This is not just a house for her to like walk around in a silk robe and order servants about. I don't think outside of her sister that there's a single person whose only job is there to serve her. And I don't know if any, like, did y'all notice that as well? She doesn't have like maids and like butlers. She has a driver that's like necessary for her. Outside of her sister being there and doing little errands and stuff for her, she does not have someone. It seems like everyone kind of pitches in and does things for her, but she doesn't have someone that takes out her clothes every day, like dresses her every day. She has professionals for certain things like hair and makeup for her performances and all that kind of stuff. But again, that's necessary staff. So there's so many details like that throughout the entire film that set it apart even like 20, 30 years later. The production is cuckoo bananas, guys. They're outside in different parts of Los Angeles. They're inside different buildings. Like when he went to talk to his other colleagues that he gave the letters to investigate them, they were in a whole other huge building, looked like a federal building, but at the awards ceremony, a theater full of people, never mind the actors and actresses moving backstage. To me, I get enough character development from all the characters, including Fletcher. Even though he's kind of a minor character, he has some very great lines and scenes. As far as the cinematography, it was made in the 90s, so there are a lot of things like the vignettes I expect, and the transitions were so smooth. I loved them. And I appreciate how, for example, we get to see a lot of things from Frank's perspective, like literally from his perspective, seeing the things that he notices. The direction makes a clear effort to make sure that we get the opportunity to see those things as well, because they happen within a fraction of a second. Like while he's running and he's looking at this car, somebody running, keeping pace with the car, the view is not clear, but I appreciate that we had enough points of view that we got it. You know, we get it. Frank clearly knows where he's going. He knows where he needs to run in order to keep pace with the car that is like circling around the house. From his vantage point, we can only see like flashes of it. So having access to multiple perspectives on all these different scenes was amazing. Like, for example, when they went to Miami and you got that aerial shot where you can see the hotel, you can see like the crowds, helicopters, and you see that their hotel room is the penthouse, you know? So things like that really add so much more and really emphasize over and over again that this is a global pop star we're talking about. This is not someone whose career is like rising. Her career has risen. And I like that we were able to see that in so many different ways. This is not a quick like hour, 20-minute movie. This is a good chunky 2-hour film. You get to see the tension build. You get to see the different sides of Rachel's personality, the things that really get to Frank versus the things that Frank don't care about. And to me, it's a really standout film. If you're into like romantic thriller, suspense movies, it is definitely worth a watch. The Bodyguard is a lot. I mean, the production alone, the scale alone. Yes, there are some gaps in the storyline. Yes, there are some missing pieces, but I would give The Bodyguard a 4 out of 5. I think that the organization maybe could have used some work. You know, we meet Frank first. We don't get to see an overview of Rachel's career, so we're not sure how she got here. We just know that she's here. And at this point, she's used to having her way about things. But as an audience member coming into it, it just seems like she's a spoiled brat. The challenges she had to overcome, we don't know about those things. We just know that she's ordering people around and she's having hissy fits. The connections sometimes are hard to make. And maybe that's the point, that you don't have to like her. It's not about liking her, that it's about keeping her as authentic to her character as possible and kind of ignoring what the audience might expect at that time. And I think that's a big part of why it's one of my favorite films. But you guys let me know what you think. Thank you so much for spending your time here with me. I really appreciate it. And I'll see you all next time.